The fluorescent lights of Metropolitan General's emergency room hummed a monotonous, sickly tune. It was a sound Alara Vance had come to associate with a specific kind of dread. Not the dread of blood and trauma, but the quiet, gnawing dread of invisibility. She moved through the chaos with a practiced slowness, a deliberate hesitation in her step that was not her own. It was a costume she wore, as vital as her ill-fitting blue scrubs. She was Nurse Vance, the quiet one, the clumsy one, the one who always seemed to be in the way, who fumbled with IV lines and spoke in a voice so soft it was often swallowed by the cacophony of beeping monitors and shouted commands. "Vance, mop!" The voice, sharp and imperious, belonged to Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Trauma Surgery. He didn't look at her. He never did. He pointed a polished leather shoe at a small puddle of saline near bed 4. A first-year resident had spilled it, but Alara was the designated target for all such minor indignities.
"Yes, doctor," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the floor. She retrieved a mop and bucket from the utility closet, the scent of bleach and ammonia, familiar assault on her senses. As she worked, she could feel his eyes on her, and the eyes of the others. Brenda, a senior nurse with a perpetually sour expression, smirked at a junior colleague. Chloe, a younger nurse who sometimes offered Alara a kind, fleeting smile when no one was looking, suddenly found the patient charts in her hands intensely fascinating. Fear was a currency in Finch's kingdom, and no one could afford to be seen sympathizing with the court jester. Alara's hands, the ones that now pushed a dirty mop, were scarred. Not from kitchen accidents or childhood mishaps. Fine, silvery lines crisscrossed her knuckles and the backs of her hands, a faint roadmap of another life. A life where her hands moved with the impossible speed and precision of a surgeon, but in fields of dust and fire, not sterile operating rooms. A life where the humming wasn't from fluorescent lights, but from the twin rotors of a Black Hawk helicopter descending into a hot landing zone. She had to actively suppress the muscle memory, the urge to scan the room for threats, to clock the exits, to assess the posture and intent of every person in her vicinity. Instead, she focused on the linoleum tiles, one square at a time. That was her life now, one demeaning task at a time. Finch strolled past her, his expensive cologne a foul cloud in the sterile air. He paused, looking down at her as if she were a particularly uninteresting insect. "Did you manage to complete the patient intake forms I gave you this morning, Vance? Or was the alphabet too challenging today?" Laughter, sycophantic and sharp, rippled from Brenda and a few of the residents eager to curry favor. Alara's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she forced it to relax. "I finished them, Dr. Finch. They're in your tray." "Are they?" he said, feigning surprise. "Let's hope they're legible. Your handwriting looks like a seismograph during an earthquake." He didn't wait for a response, simply swept away toward the nurse's station, his ego leaving a wake that rocked the confidence of everyone around him. Alara finished mopping, her movements careful, almost painfully slow. It was a lie. Every part of it was a lie. Her slowness was a shield, her timidity a fortress. She was hiding in plain sight, seeking refuge from the ghosts that haunted her. Ghosts of fallen comrades, of sand-swept landscapes, of a single catastrophic mission that had shattered her world and sent her running toward anonymity. She had been someone else once, someone important, someone whose hands didn't mop floors, but packed grievous wounds under enemy fire, performed needle decompressions in plummeting helicopters, and held the line between life and death for the most elite soldiers on the planet. She had been a pararescue specialist, a PJ. Call sign, Angel. Here, she was just Vance. The afternoon bled into evening, the controlled chaos of the ER escalating with the setting sun. A call came in. Multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate. The relative quiet was shattered. "All right, people, look alive!" Finch's voice boomed, a general addressing his troops. "I want trauma bays 1, 2, and 3 prepped and ready. Evans, you take 1. Miller, you're with me in 2. Vance, stay out of the way. Go restock the glove dispensers." "Yes, doctor." As the first wave of ambulances arrived, their sirens wailing like tormented spirits, Alara moved to the supply closets. She worked methodically, her back to the frantic energy of the room. She could hear the clipped reports, the groans of the injured, the staccato rhythm of medical terminology. A broken femur in Bay 1, a suspected pneumothorax in Bay 3.
and in Bay 2, Finch was working on a severe head laceration. Alara stacked boxes of latex gloves, her mind a placid lake on the surface, but a raging torrent underneath. She could picture the injuries, feel the diagnostic pathways unfolding in her mind. She had to shut it down. That part of her was supposed to be dead. It was safer that way. Then, the last ambulance brought him in. He was a John Doe. No ID, no wallet, just the clothes on his back. Worn jeans and a t-shirt, now shredded and stained with blood and grime. He was unconscious, his face a mask of cuts and bruises. The paramedics rattled off his vitals. Unresponsive male, approximately 35, GCS of 5, vitals are unstable, BP is all over the place. We suspect major head trauma from a secondary impact. Finch glanced at the man on the gurney with disdain. Another one. Looks like a vagrant caught in the wrong place. All right, stick him in Bay 4. Get a head CT, check for bleeds, and let's get him processed and moved. I need this bay for actual patients. The implication was clear. This man, with no insurance and no identity, was a logistical problem, not a patient to be saved. He was assigned to a junior resident who seemed overwhelmed by the sheer volume of casualties. Alara finished her restocking, her mandated exile from the action complete. She was tasked with taking the John Doe's initial vitals and prepping him for the CT scan. It was a menial job, one nobody else wanted. She approached the gurney in Bay 4, the curtain drawn halfway. The man was built like a mountain, his musculature dense and defined even in his battered state. This was no vagrant. The calluses on his hands were from a rifle grip, not manual labor. A faint, geometric tattoo peeked out from under the collar of his torn shirt. A unit insignia she almost recognized. Her heart began to beat a different rhythm, a faster, more alert cadence she hadn't felt in 2 years. She attached the blood pressure cuff, her movements suddenly losing their manufactured clumsiness. They became fluid, economical. She checked his pupils with her penlight. They were sluggish, but it was something else that caught her attention. A faint, almost imperceptible twitch in his left eyelid. A myoclonic jerk. She'd seen it before. Once. In a training simulation for exposure to nerve agents. Her breath hitched. She leaned closer, her professional mask crumbling. She ignored the contusions and lacerations, the obvious signs of physical trauma. Her gaze swept over his skin. There. On the inside of his forearm, partially obscured by dirt and a smear of blood, was a faint, web-like rash. Livido reticularis. But the pattern was wrong. It was too aggressive, too pronounced. And then she smelled it. A faint, bitter almond scent on his breath, almost completely masked by the metallic tang of blood. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't head trauma. Or, if it was the least of his problems. The twitching eyelid, the aggressive rash, the scent, the wildly fluctuating vitals. It wasn't a textbook case. It was a classified one. This man was dying from something very few people in the world knew how to treat. A fast-acting, custom-designed neurotoxin. Probably cyanide-based, but modified. Standard treatment would kill him. His body needed a specific 2-part cocktail. First, amyl nitrite to induce methemoglobinemia, binding the toxin. Second, a massive intravenous dose of hydroxycobalamin to bind with the cyanide and allow the body to excrete it harmlessly as cyanocobalamin. The hospital had hydroxycobalamin. It was used in smoke inhalation kits. But the standard dose was 5 grams. This man would need at least twice that, maybe more, administered directly and immediately. The CT scan Finch ordered would be a death sentence. The radiation would accelerate the cellular breakdown. He had maybe 10 minutes, maybe less. For the first time in 2 years, Alara Vance disappeared, and the angel took her place. She tore through the curtain of Bay 4. Finch was preening at the nurse's station, recounting his supposedly brilliant work on the head laceration. "Dr. Finch!" Her voice was not a murmur. It was a crack of thunder. It cut through the ER noise and silenced it completely. Every head turned. Finch looked up, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. "What did you say?" "The John Doe in Bay 4, she said, her voice hard, precise, and loud. "Cancel the head CT. He's not suffering from head trauma. He's been exposed to a cyanide-derivative neurotoxin." A stunned silence fell over the room. Finch's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. "Are you insane?" he hissed, stalking toward her. "You, a probationary nurse who can barely take a blood pressure reading, are going to diagnose my patient?" "He's not your patient, he's mine," Alara stated, her eyes like chips of ice. "And you're going to kill him. He needs 10 grams of hydroxycobalamin and an ampule of amyl nitrite, now. His symptoms are classic." Finch got right in her face, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You will do as you are told. You will prep that patient for his scan, or you will be out of this hospital so fast your head will spin. Do you understand me, Vance?" He was so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "No," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. She saw the decision in his eyes a second before he made it. He thought a public humiliation would bring her to heel. "You are incompetent," he spat, his voice rising again for all to hear. "You are a danger to patients. You are fired. Security!" He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep, intending to physically drag her away from the bay. It was a mistake. A profound, catastrophic mistake. The moment his hand touched her, 2 years of carefully constructed suppression evaporated in a flash of pure instinct. Her body moved with a speed that defied logic. It was a simple, fluid motion, a shift of weight, a turn of her wrist, a precise application of pressure to the radial nerve on his forearm. Finch gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain as his grip was broken. His hand went numb, his fingers tingling uselessly. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face a mask of disbelief. The entire ER staff was frozen, staring. The clumsy, timid nurse had just neutralized the chief of trauma surgery with the effortless grace of a martial artist. Alara paid them no mind. The clock was ticking. She turned and bolted, not toward the exit, but toward the crash carts and the smoke inhalation kits. "Somebody stop her!" Finch shrieked, his voice cracking with humiliation and rage. 2 burly security guards, drawn by the commotion, moved to intercept her. They were big. She was faster. She didn't fight them. She evaded them. She sidestepped the first, using his own momentum to send him stumbling into a supply rack. She ducked under the outstretched arms of the second, grabbing 2 of the large red hydroxycobalamin kits from a cart as she passed. She sprinted back to Bay 4, the guards and a furious Dr. Finch close behind. She ripped the curtain closed, found the simple lock on the sliding door to the small trauma bay, and slammed it shut. It wouldn't hold for long. Pounding fists immediately began to shake the door. "Vance, open this door right now! That's assault! You're finished!" Finch screamed from the other side. Alara ignored him. Her world had shrunk to the man on the gurney and the ticking clock in her head. His breathing was becoming shallow, his skin taking on a faint blue tinge. Cyanosis. She was running out of time. Her hands moved with a blur of practiced efficiency. She tore open the kits. Each contained a vial of red powder and a bag of saline, 5 grams each. She didn't have time for a proper IV drip. She grabbed a 100 cubic centimeter syringe, a thick gauge needle, and started reconstituting the drug herself, drawing up the saline and injecting it into the vials, shaking them violently to mix the solution. The powder dissolved into a dark, blood-red liquid. The man already had an IV line in, but it was a small gauge, meant for simple hydration. It was too slow. She needed a central line, or something close. She ripped open his tattered shirt, exposing his chest. With no time for proper sterilization, she grabbed an alcohol wipe and cleaned a spot just below his collarbone. She didn't have a central line kit. She would have to improvise. She took a deep breath, picturing the anatomy in her mind. The subclavian vein, a large, high-flow vessel, perfect for rapid infusion, and incredibly dangerous to access without ultrasound guidance. One slip, and she could puncture his lung. The pounding on the door grew more frantic. She could hear them trying to pry it open. She held the large needle, attached to the first of 2 massive syringes filled with the red antidote. She placed her thumb on his sternal notch and her index finger on his clavicle, marking the insertion point. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. "These things we do, that others may live," she whispered, the old PJ motto a prayer on her lips. Then she plunged the needle in. She advanced it slowly, aspirating, feeling for the subtle give of the vein wall. Flash! A burst of dark, non-oxygenated blood filled the syringe tip. She was in. Without hesitation, she began to push the plunger. The thick, red liquid flowed into his system, a river of life pushing back a tide of death. The door suddenly burst open. It flew off its track, crashing to the floor. Dr. Finch stood there, flanked by the 2 security guards and a half-dozen wide-eyed nurses and residents. His face was a thundercloud of pure fury. "Get away from him!" he roared. He saw the massive syringe in her hand, the needle buried in the patient's chest. "My God, she's killing him! Get her off him!" The security guards rushed forward. Alara had already emptied the first syringe. She pulled it out, grabbed the second, and plunged it back into the same site, her movements a seamless, desperate ballet. She had to get the second dose in. The first guard grabbed her shoulder. She ignored him, her entire focus on pushing the plunger, her thumb aching with the pressure. "I said, get off," the guard yelled, trying to wrestle her away. She braced herself against the gurney, her body a shield for the patient. "Just a few more seconds," she grunted, her teeth clenched. The second guard grabbed her other arm. They were pulling her back, the needle threatening to rip free from the patient's vein. "Stop!" she screamed, a raw, primal sound of desperation. And then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A low, rhythmic thumping. Thump, 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 thump. It was getting louder, rapidly. Everyone in the ER, including the guards pulling at Alara, froze and looked toward the glass doors of the ambulance bay. The sound was deafening now, a physical pressure on their chests. It wasn't a helicopter landing on the roof. It was landing on the street, right outside. The windows rattled. Dust and debris swirled in the ambulance bay. Through the glass, they could see it. A sleek, black helicopter, devoid of any markings save for a small, stylized American flag on its tail. A military helicopter. AMH-60, Black Hawk. Its side doors slid open before its skids even touched the asphalt. Men began to pour out. They were not soldiers. They were operators. Clad in black tactical gear, armed with short-barreled rifles held at a low ready, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. They moved with a terrifying, fluid purpose, securing the perimeter of the hospital entrance in seconds. At the same time, a convoy of black government SUVs screeched to a halt, blocking the road in both directions. Doors flew open and more men, these in sharp suits with earpieces, emerged and formed a cordon. The entire hospital entrance was locked down in less than 30 seconds. Back in the ER, everyone was paralyzed, staring in stunned silence. Finch's mouth hung open. The security guards had let go of Alara, their faces pale with shock and fear. The main doors to the ER burst open. 2 of the suited men entered, followed by a figure who commanded instant, absolute authority. He was a man in his late 50s, tall and ramrod straight, with silver hair cropped short, and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He wore the immaculate dress uniform of a United States Air Force general, his chest a constellation of ribbons and medals. 4 stars glittered on each of his shoulders. He was a full general. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept the room, missing nothing. They dismissed Finch. They ignored the security guards. They landed on Alara. And they softened, just for a moment, with a look of profound relief. The general strode forward, his polished shoes clicking on the linoleum. The crowd of doctors and nurses parted before him like the Red Sea. He stopped just outside Bay 4, his gaze taking in the scene. Alara, standing over the patient, the empty syringe still in her hand. The broken door. The terrified staff. Finch, finally finding his voice, stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "I am Dr. Alistair Finch, Chief of Surgery here. This is a civilian hospital. You have no jurisdiction." The general didn't even look at him. He held up a hand, and Finch's words died in his throat. The general's eyes were locked on Alara. "Angel," he said, his voice a low rumble that was both a question and a statement. "Is that you?" Alara stared at him. General Sterling, her former commanding officer, the man who had pinned her Air Force cross to her chest in a dusty tent in Afghanistan, the man she had last seen at a funeral 2 years ago. She could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. "Thank God," Sterling breathed. "We tracked Captain Thorne's beacon here. It went dark 20 minutes ago. We feared the worst." He finally looked at the man on the gurney. Status report. The command was soft, but absolute. Alara's training slammed back into place. "John Doe, identified by you as Captain Thorne, sir. Presented with symptoms of advanced neurotoxin exposure. Cyanide derivative. Initial diagnosis by hospital staff was head trauma. I administered 10 grams of hydroxycobalamin via improvised subclavian access. Vitals were crashing, but should stabilize shortly. He needs observation and supportive care. He is not to be moved." Her report was flawless, clear, concise, and utterly professional. Chloe stared, her jaw on the floor. Brenda looked like she had seen a ghost. Finch's face was a mottled canvas of confusion, rage, and dawning horror. "Captain Thorne?" he stammered. That's impossible. He's a homeless man." General Sterling finally turned his head and fixed Finch with a gaze so cold it could freeze fire. "You are Dr. Finch?" "Yes, I am the chief of—" "Dr. Finch," Sterling cut him off, his voice dropping an octave. "You diagnosed a decorated Delta Force captain carrying intelligence vital to our national security as a vagrant." He took a step closer. "You ordered a CT scan, which would have killed him. You attempted to physically prevent my operator from rendering life-saving aid. You fired the most qualified medical professional in this entire state." Sterling paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Your medical opinion is no longer required. Your authority in this room is non-existent. The United States military is assuming full command and control of this patient's care." He turned back to Alara. "Nurse Vance, as of this moment, you are in charge. Whatever you need, you get. Staff, equipment, this entire floor if necessary. My men will ensure your orders are followed, without question." Finch looked like he had been struck by lightning. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "This is my hospital. I am the chief of surgery. She is a disgraced, fired nurse." Sterling turned to the two suited men at the door. "Secure Dr. Finch. He is a person of interest in a national security investigation. Confiscate his phone and any personal electronics. He is not to speak to anyone." The men moved with silent efficiency, flanking a sputtering, apoplectic Finch. "This is an outrage! I'll have your job! I'll sue the entire government!" he shrieked, as they calmly but firmly escorted him away. The ER was silent, save for the steady beeping of Captain Thorne's monitor. His blood pressure was stabilizing. The bluish tint was receding from his skin. His breathing was deepening. Alara had saved him. Sterling looked at Alara, his expression a mixture of pride and deep concern. "It's good to see you, Angel, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "You too, sir," she said, her voice finally trembling. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Sterling said, his eyes hardening, "we find out why someone wanted Captain Thorne dead, and why a civilian doctor was so eager to help them." The next hour was a blur. Sterling's men, a mix of Air Force Special Tactics officers and civilian intelligence agents, transformed the corner of the ER into a command post. Laptops were opened, encrypted communication lines were established, and armed guards were posted at every entrance to the floor. The hospital administration, initially blustering and threatening lawsuits, fell silent when presented with a single document signed by the Secretary of Defense. Alara, no longer Vance the clumsy nurse, but Angel the lead medic, directed the care of Captain Thorne with an authority that left her former colleagues speechless. She ordered blood panels to track the toxin levels, set up a cooling protocol to protect his brain, and supervised the placement of a proper central line and an arterial line for constant blood pressure monitoring. Chloe, the young nurse, followed her every command with wide, adoring eyes, her fear of Finch replaced by awe of Alara. "I don't understand," Chloe whispered as they adjusted a drip. "Who are you?" Alara gave her a small, tired smile. "Just a nurse," she said, but she knew that wasn't true anymore. Her cover was blown. Her quiet life was over. An intelligence agent approached Sterling and Alara, his face grim. "Sir, we have initial forensics on Finch's phone and financials. It's not good." Talk, Sterling commanded. Finch has been receiving large, untraceable payments from an offshore account for the last 6 months. The account is linked to a shell corporation known to be a front for a mercenary group called Scorpio. Alara felt a chill. She knew Scorpio. A ruthless private army of ex-special forces from various countries, sold to the highest bidder. They were ghosts, specializing in assassinations and deniable operations. Thorne's mission was to track a shipment of VXM, the agent continued. It's a modified nerve agent Scorpio was planning to sell to a terrorist cell. Thorne got the location of the exchange, but his team was ambushed. He was the sole survivor. He was exposed during the firefight, but managed to self-administer a partial dose of the field antidote before he escaped. The field antidote just buys you time, Alara murmured, thinking aloud. It doesn't stop it. Exactly, the agent said. He was trying to get to a safe house, but was injured in the pileup on the interstate. Scorpio must have tracked him to the city. They couldn't risk a direct assault on a hospital, so they activated an asset on the inside. Finch, Sterling said, his voice like grinding stone. They paid him to make sure Thorne died on the operating table, and to make it look like an accident. It explains why he was so adamant about the misdiagnosis, Alara added. He wasn't just arrogant, he was following orders. The revelation hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just corruption, it was treason. Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm blared from Captain Thorne's monitor. His heart rate was plummeting. Ventricular fibrillation. He's crashing, Chloe yelled. Alara was already moving. It's the toxin, a secondary wave. Get the crash cart, now! She began chest compressions, her movements powerful and rhythmic, a stark contrast to the frail persona she had cultivated for so long. Push one of Epi, she commanded. Chloe scrambled to comply. He's not responding, the young nurse cried out, her voice panicked. Charging to 200, Alara yelled, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. Clear! She slammed the paddles onto Thorne's chest. His body arched off the bed. The monitor showed no change. Flatline. Again! Charging to 300. Clear! Another jolt. Nothing. The steady, soul-destroying tone of the flatline filled the room. He's gone, a resident whispered from the doorway. No, he's not, Alara growled, her face slick with sweat. She looked at the monitors, her mind racing, processing dozens of variables at once. The toxin, the antidote, the electrical shocks. It wasn't working. The defibrillator wasn't restarting his heart because the problem wasn't just electrical. The toxin was interfering with the sodium-potassium channels in the cardiac muscle itself. Standard ACLS protocol was useless. She needed to do something radical. Give me a cardiac needle and 10 cc's of lidocaine, she snapped. Lidocaine? For VFib? The resident questioned. The guidelines didn't account for this, Alara shot back, her eyes blazing. Now! Chloe, trusting her completely, had already procured the items. Alara drew up the medication into the long, formidable-looking syringe. This was an intracardiac injection, a desperate, last-ditch maneuver rarely performed outside of movies. She located the space between his fourth and fifth ribs, just to the left of the sternum. With the same terrifying precision she'd shown before, she inserted the long needle deep into his chest, aiming for the right ventricle. She aspirated. Dark blood filled the syringe. She was in the heart. She injected the lidocaine directly into the muscle. For a moment, there was nothing. The flatline tone droned on. It didn't work, the resident said, defeated. Wait, Alara whispered. Beep. A single hesitant beat appeared on the monitor. Beep. Beep. Another. Beep, 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 beep. A steady, if weak, sinus rhythm returned. His heart was beating again. The room erupted in gasped expressions of disbelief and relief. General Sterling, who had watched the entire ordeal without a word, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for minutes. He looked at Alara, who was leaning against the gurney, breathing heavily. Angel, he said, his voice thick with emotion. There's no one else in the world who could have done that. Just as the immediate crisis passed, one of Sterling's men rushed in, his weapon drawn. Sir, we have a problem. The new orderly on this floor. He's not on the hospital's roster. Alara's head snapped up. Her eyes darted around the bay. She saw him. A man in a janitor's uniform, pushing a mop bucket near the far end of the ward. He had been there the whole time, unnoticed in the chaos. His posture was wrong. Too calm. too observant. As their eyes met, the man's hand dipped into the bucket. It came out not with a mop, but with a pistol fitted with a suppressor. He was a Scorpio assassin. Finch wasn't their only asset. He was just the first line of defense. This was the backup plan. Time seemed to slow down. The operator who had given the warning was already raising his rifle, but the assassin was closer. He had a clear shot at Thorn, and at Alara. He chose Alara. He knew she was the only thing keeping the captain alive. But Alara was already moving. Before the assassin could fully level his weapon, she grabbed the heavy stainless steel instrument tray next to the bed. With a primal roar, she hurled it. The tray spun through the air like a discus, crashing into the assassin's head and gun hand with a sickening crunch of metal and bone. The pistol clattered to the floor. The assassin staggered back, disoriented, a deep gash opening on his forehead. He was a professional, though. He shook off the blow and lunged for his weapon. He never made it. Alara launched herself off the gurney, crossing the 10 feet between them in a heartbeat. She didn't attack his head. She attacked his base. A vicious, targeted kick swept his legs out from under him. He hit the linoleum floor with a heavy thud that knocked the wind out of him. Before he could recover, she was on him. Her knee slammed down on his gun arm, pinning it to the floor. Her left hand grabbed his hair, yanking his head back to expose his throat. Her right hand, holding the now empty cardiac syringe, poised the needle just above his carotid artery. The entire takedown took less than 3 seconds. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly terrifying. Sterling's operators, who had just brought their rifles to bear, lowered them slowly, their expressions a mixture of shock and professional respect. The ER staff looked on in abject horror and amazement. The clumsy nurse was gone forever, replaced by a warrior. Alara leaned down, her face inches from the captured assassins. "Who sent you?" she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Who else is in the hospital?" The man just snarled, blood and defiance in his eyes. "Doesn't matter," Sterling said, stepping forward. "We're not safe here. They know where he is. They'll keep coming." He looked at Alara, who was still pinning the struggling assassin to the floor. "We have to move him. Now. Is there anywhere you can think of? Off-grid, secure, somewhere they won't look for him?" Ilara's mind raced. Not a military base. That would be the first place Scorpio would expect. Not another hospital. They needed somewhere isolated, defensible, with the bare essentials for medical care. An image flashed in her mind. A place from her past. A place she had tried to forget. "I know a place," she said, her voice strained. "A cabin. In the mountains north of here. It was my father's. It's not on any map. It has its own generator and a well." Sterling nodded. "Is it defensible?" "It's in a box canyon," she replied. "One way in, one way out. Clear fields of fire for 100 yards in every direction." It was the place she had gone to after the mission failed, after the funeral. The place where she had decided to bury the angel and become Alara Vance. Now, she had to go back. "It'll have to do," Sterling decided. "Prep him for transport. We leave in 5 minutes." The escape from Metropolitan General was a masterpiece of military precision. While Alara and Chloe stabilized Thorn for the move, packing essential medications and a portable monitor into bags, Sterling's team created a diversion. 2 of the black SUVs, sirens blaring, peeled out of the hospital driveway and sped east, drawing any potential surveillance with them. Meanwhile, a nondescript panel van, a plumber's van, according to the faded logo on its side, was backed into the ambulance bay. Thorn, on a collapsible gurney, was loaded into the back, along with Alara, Sterling, and 2 of his best operators. Chloe stood at the entrance, her face pale. "Be careful," she whispered to Alara. "Keep your head down," Alara advised. "Just act like you don't know anything." She handed Chloe a small piece of paper. "If anything happens to us, give this number to the authorities. No one else." It was the direct line to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. The van's doors slid shut, plunging them into the dim light of the cargo area. With a lurch, they pulled away from the hospital, melting into the city's evening traffic. Alara immediately went to work, checking Thorn's vitals. He was stable, for now. The ride was tense, the air thick with unspoken fear. They were exposed, vulnerable. "How did they find us so fast?" one of the operators, a man named Diaz, asked. "Finch must have had a secondary communication method," Sterling surmised. A burner phone, a coded text, something to signal his failure. Scorpio wouldn't leave a loose end like Thorn to chance. "They'll be hunting us," the other operator, a quiet giant named Graves, stated flatly.
"Let them hunt," Sterling said, his hand resting on the pistol holstered on his belt. "We're not the prey." An hour later, they left the city lights behind, climbing into the winding mountain roads. Alara directed the driver, her voice sure and steady, navigating from memory. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to a rough, unmarked dirt track. Finally, she said, "Here, stop here." The van pulled into a small clearing. Ahead, nestled in a stand of tall pines, was a rustic, single-story cabin. It looked dark and abandoned. "Graves, Diaz, sweep the perimeter," Sterling ordered. "Full 360. I want sensors on the access road." The two operators melted into the darkness, moving with the silence of ghosts. Alara used a key she kept hidden on a small chain around her neck to unlock the heavy wooden door. The air inside was stale and cold. She found a switch, and the cabin flickered to life, powered by the diesel generator she could hear rumbling to life in a small shed out back. The interior was Spartan. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. It was clean, but dusty. A time capsule of her grief. They moved Thorn inside, setting him up in the main bedroom on a bed that had been her father's. Alara hung bags of saline and medication from a coat rack, her makeshift IV pole. The portable monitor beeped a steady, reassuring rhythm. Diaz returned. "Perimeter is clear, sir. I've placed seismic and infrared sensors up the track. Nothing gets within a quarter-mile of this place without us knowing." Sterling nodded, his eyes scanning the tree line through the cabin window. "They'll come," he said. "It's just a matter of when." The night wore on. Alara sat by Thorn's bedside, monitoring his condition. The antidote was working, but the toxin had done significant damage. He was in a deep coma, his body fighting a war on a cellular level. Around 3 a.m., he began to stir. His eyes fluttered open. They were hazy, unfocused. Where?" he rasped, his voice rough. Alara leaned closer. "You're safe," she said softly. "You're in a safe house. My name is Alara. You were exposed." His eyes struggled to focus on her face. "Angel?" he whispered, the name a ghost on his lips. "They said Angel would be there." He had been briefed. He knew who she was. "I'm here," she said, her hand instinctively going to his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Rest, Captain. We'll get you through this." A flicker of a smile touched his lips before his eyes slipped shut again, this time into a natural, healing sleep. At that moment, a small device on Diaz's vest chirped, a single, urgent beep. "Contact," Diaz whispered, his body instantly tense. Multiple vehicles, moving fast up the track. Sterling moved to the window, peering through a pair of binoculars. 3 SUVs, he reported, his voice grim. "No headlights. They're using night vision. They're pros." "At least a dozen men," Graves added, looking at the feed from the sensors on a small tablet. "Probably more." Scorpio had found them. "Alara," Sterling said, turning to her, "stay with the captain. Lock this door. Do not open it for any reason unless you hear my voice." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her heart pounding. "There are only 3 of you." A hard smile touched Sterling's lips. 4, he corrected, drawing his sidearm. "I may be a general, but I started my career in this field. Diaz, Graves, positions. Let's greet our guests." The 2 operators nodded, checked their weapons, and slipped out into the darkness. Sterling took up a position by the main window, using the stone fireplace as cover. The siege began. The night erupted in a fury of suppressed gunfire. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness from the tree line. Sterling, Diaz, and Graves answered with precise, controlled bursts. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of a prepared position. Alara, locked in the bedroom, could only listen to the terrifying symphony of the firefight. She stood with her back to the door, a heavy iron fire poker clutched in her hand, her body a last line of defense for the unconscious man on the bed. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Then, she heard a new sound. A scraping noise from the roof. They weren't just attacking from the front, they were on the cabin itself. A moment later, a section of the ceiling in the corner of the room began to splinter. They were cutting through. She had no gun. No way to fight back against an enemy coming from above.
She looked around the room, her eyes wild with desperation. The bed, the monitor, Thorn, the oxygen tank. A small, portable oxygen tank was next to the bed for emergencies. An idea, born of desperation and a deep knowledge of chemistry, sparked in her mind. She grabbed the tank and a roll of medical tape from her bag. Working with frantic speed, she taped one of Thorn's saline bags, nearly full, to the side of the oxygen tank. Then she took the IV line, ripped the needle off the end, and wedged the open tube under the tank's valve. The ceiling splintered again. A boot smashed through. She had seconds. She cranked the valve on the oxygen tank all the way open. The highly flammable, pure oxygen hissed out, saturating the saline bag. She placed the improvised device on the floor, directly under the hole in the ceiling. Then she took cover behind the heavy wooden bed frame, pulling the blankets over her head. A black-clad figure dropped through the hole, landing silently on the floor. He saw Thorn on the bed and raised his rifle. From outside, another burst of gunfire echoed. A stray bullet from one of Sterling's men ripped through the thin cabin wall.
It was a 1-in-a-million shot. The bullet tore through the room, struck the metal valve of the oxygen tank, and created a single white-hot spark. The result was catastrophic. The pure oxygen ignited, turning the saline bag into a bomb. The explosion was a contained, brutal concussion. It blew the assassin back against the wall and sent a jet of flame shooting back up through the hole in the roof. Alara felt the blast wave wash over her, her ears ringing. The room was filled with smoke and the smell of burnt plastic. The firefight outside abruptly stopped. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. "Alara!" Sterling's voice, frantic. "Report! Are you all right?" "I'm okay!" she yelled, her voice hoarse. "The room is clear!" She crawled out from behind the bed. The assassin was down, incapacitated. Thorn was still unconscious, protected by the bulk of the bed. A moment later, Sterling kicked open the bedroom door, his gun raised. He saw the scene: the downed assassin, the ruptured oxygen tank, the scorch marks on the ceiling, and his jaw dropped. What the hell was that? "Improvised explosive device," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Oxygen and a spark." Diaz appeared behind Sterling. "Sir, they're gone. The explosion must have spooked their leader. They're in full retreat." They had survived. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the bullet-riddled cabin, a fleet of official military helicopters descended on the canyon. Reinforcements had arrived. Thorn was carefully loaded onto a medevac chopper, headed for Walter Reed Medical Center. Sterling stood with Alara as the helicopter lifted off. "You saved him, Alara," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Twice." "It's what I was trained to do," she said, looking at her hands. They were steady now. "Now," Sterling said, his expression turning to cold fury, "it's time to finish this. It's time to deal with Dr. Finch." The press conference was already underway in the main lobby of Metropolitan General. Dr. Alistair Finch, released due to a jurisdictional misunderstanding, stood at a podium, his face a mask of false sincerity. He was spinning his narrative. He spoke of a disturbed, unstable nurse, a tragic case of PTSD, who had snapped, kidnapped a patient, and endangered lives. He painted himself as the victim, the steady hand trying to maintain order in the face of chaos. The hospital board stood behind him, nodding gravely. Brenda and other nurses were in the audience, ready to give corroborating statements. "This nurse, Alara Vance," Finch said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, "is a danger to the public, and we will not rest until she is brought to justice and the patient she abducted is safely recovered." "That won't be necessary, Doctor." The voice came from the back of the lobby. General Sterling, flanked by Alara and a team of military police, strode into the room. The cameras swiveled. Gasps rippled through the crowd of reporters. Finch froze, his face draining of all color. "General," he stammered, "what is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, Dr. Finch," Sterling boomed, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics, "is that your career in medicine and your freedom are over." He nodded to an agent, who connected a laptop to the large screen behind the podium. An image appeared. Bank records, offshore accounts. "This is proof of payment from the Scorpio mercenary group to you, Dr. Finch. Payment for the termination of a United States military officer." Finch's face began to crumple. That's
That's fabricated. It's a lie. A new file opened on the screen, an audio file. Finch's voice filled the room, cold and clear, from a recording captured by intelligence services. The target is here. He's stable. I'll arrange for a complication during imaging. It will be untraceable. Transfer the remaining funds. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Finch looked like a man who had seen his own ghost. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Dr. Alastair Finch, Sterling announced. You are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason against the United States of America. The military police moved forward, their handcuffs glinting under the television lights. Finch finally broke.
No! He screamed, his voice a pathetic wail. It was her! The nurse! She set me up! I'm innocent! I'm the chief of surgery! He was still screaming as they dragged him, weeping and struggling, out of the lobby and away from the life he had built on ego and corruption. The hospital board members looked on, their faces ashen. Brenda slipped away into the crowd, her face pale with shame. Alara stood tall, her expression unreadable. Chloe rushed through the crowd and threw her arms around her. You did it, she sobbed. You were amazing. Alara hugged her back, a genuine, warm gesture. The next day, the story was everywhere. The angel of Metro General. The quiet nurse who was secretly a decorated war hero. Her name was cleared. Her nursing license, which Finch had tried to have revoked, was reinstated with a formal apology from the state board. A week later, she stood with General Sterling on a military airfield. Captain Thorne, now conscious and on the road to a full recovery, stood with them, leaning on a cane. I owe you my life, Thorne said to Alara, his voice filled with a gratitude so profound it needed few words. You would have done the same for me, she replied. The president sends his personal thanks, Sterling told her. He's authorized the creation of a new unit, a small, elite, rapid deployment team, a medical QRF, for lack of a better term. Specialists who can drop into any situation, military or civilian, and handle the impossible cases. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. It needs a commander, someone with expertise in both tactical operations and advanced field medicine, someone who knows how to improvise under fire. He didn't need to ask. I accept, Alara said, without hesitation. There was no more hiding, no more running. The angel was back. Welcome back to the fight, Colonel Vance, Sterling said, a proud smile on his face. He had already submitted her promotion. A sleek executive jet waited on the tarmac, its engines humming. It was heading for Washington, to her new life. Alara looked back one last time at the city, at the life she was leaving behind. The quiet dread, the humming fluorescent lights, the ghost of the clumsy nurse. She felt nothing but relief. She turned and walked toward the jet, toward her future. Captain Thorne walked beside her, no longer a patient, but an ally. A new chapter was beginning, one she would write on her own terms. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. Just because someone is quiet or appears meek does not mean they are weak. True strength and skill are often hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. It shows that doing the right thing, even when it means defying authority and risking everything, is ultimately what defines a person's character. Alara's journey is a reminder that integrity and courage will always triumph over arrogance and corruption. In the end, it's not the title you hold, but the actions you take that truly matter. What would you have done if you were in Alara's shoes? Would you have risked your career to save a patient that your superior had dismissed? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Have a nice rest of your day.